Alright, I am back with another video, and today we have a fairly interesting build. Now, I knew I wanted to do something with Arcane Trickster. It's definitely one of the subclasses I've utilised the least in my time here on YouTube, and I wanted to do something with it, something that I haven't done yet. But the problem is Arcane Trickster is very limited in what it's able to do in comparison to, say, other rogue subclasses, especially if you're trying to multiclass, whereas its most interesting unique feature comes at level 9. So it's a bit hard to work with Arcane Gnome, Arcane Gnome? I was reading the Deep Gnome thing at the top of the screen, Arcane Trickster Rogue, a lot of the time. So I kind of was looking around, wasn't really sure what to do. I was scouring the wiki for ages. I originally had the idea to combine it with Eldritch Knight for some throwing weapon shenanigans, which may be its own video in the future, but I couldn't really find anything that I initially wanted to stick with. And then it hit me. There is something that I actually haven't used yet, something I've been saving for the right video, and that is a brand new subclass. Now, as for what that subclass is, you'll see as we get further into the video. Let's not spoil the surprise right away. But when I kind of looked at that subclass's abilities, I thought, hey, this actually synergizes extremely well with Rogue, but especially Arcane Trickster, for an interesting character and some fun shenanigans. Of course, the new subclass is modded, however it is a mod that is available to all platforms, so you guys will be able to get your hands on it pretty much right away and start playing around with it. Also, speaking of modding news, just a quick side note, we just got a massive mod released on all platforms that adds almost all of the fighter subclasses from tabletop into this game, so yeah, there's going to be a lot of fighter videos coming up. This is basically like a early patch 8 for me. This is a lot of fun stuff to play with, so expect to see some fighter videos soon. But anyways, without further ado, let's get into the build. Starting things off, we are going to be playing as a gnome today, because I genuinely don't remember the last time I built a gnome. I don't build enough of the shorter races, usually because YouTube doesn't like them algorithm-wise, but otherwise I wanted to just do it today because, screw it, why not? Let's build a gnome. So I've built a deep gnome specifically today, but being a gnome means we're going to get gnome cunning, which is going to give us advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws. While our wisdom is not going to be the highest, there is an opportunity to maybe use some items or start boosting things across this build to be able to boost that up a little bit to just be great at all mental saving throws, which for a build like this, which is going to be a bit concentration focused, is great to have. So, and again, that's just a benefit of being a gnome. I wanted to make a gnome today, and it's just a nice passive buff. However, for our deep gnome, we also get a couple of extra things, namely superior dark vision, as well as advantage on stealth checks, which for a rogue is great. So yeah, overall a very fun race to pair with this build. So, as I said, we are going to be starting off as a rogue. We're going to be starting with rogue to get the weapon and armor proficiencies that I want, as well as many skill proficiencies as possible. Because when we move over to the ability scores, you can see we get quite a few. But let's talk about the ability scores real quick. Strength is at 8, we don't need it. Dexterity is also at 8, we do need it, but we're going to be using the gloves of dex to bump that up. I would say in the very early game, especially if you want to start with Arcane Trickster Rogue or our subclass, you might want to swap either intelligence or charisma with dexterity here. Probably charisma, since I think you're going to be taking the charisma levels a bit early. So I would say probably swap intelligence and dexterity around to the very start, but once you get kind of later into Act 1 and get the gloves of dex, you'll want to go for these stats that you see here with a respec. Thank you, Withers. Constitution is at 14. For a concentration heavy build, I would have liked this a bit higher, but I found that this works perfectly fine, as this build is more of a hit and run and not even get attacked in the first place type build, rather than a tanking hits type of build. This build kind of works out to be a bit more support focused. You're going to be doing a lot of kind of control spells that are going to lock down specific enemies or multiple groups of them, as well as being able to provide really damning debuffs to enemies that are going to allow your party to go wild and also take the hits for you. So I think Constitution at this level is going to be pretty damn good for us overall. We don't need a massive hit point pool as a rogue in this case. Next up is Intelligence. This is going to be one of our spellcasting modifiers because we are playing with a Arcane Trickster Rogue, so I wanted to have this decently high. Wisdom is a little bit lower than I would like, but it's a happy medium for what we're going for here. And Charisma is at 17 because we are going to be using a half feat to bump this up later. Moving on to skill proficiencies. It's up to you really what you want to take here. Just make sure that you have Deception and Persuasion in some shape or form. Obviously, this build is called the Deceiver, and the subclass that we're going to be using later specifically plays off of Persuasion and Deception. So I want to recommend that you have at least proficiency, but expertise is much better. So I've gone with the Charlatan background for obvious reasons. We're playing a deceiving type character, meaning that sleight of hand is going to allow us to kind of pickpocket people, which makes sense in my opinion, and Deception being our main skill that we want from this. With our expertise, we're going to have a +7. As well as with expertise and persuasion, we're also going to get a +7 to that, meaning that it's going to work out really well for us in the long run. Again, you will see pretty quick. Stealth I've also chosen because we have advantage on stealth checks and it makes sense for a rogue. Finally, leaving with insight, because we are so good at lying to people, we're also very good at telling when others are lying, so we're able to read people. As well as acrobatics, because I want at least one skill to prevent us from being shoved, and for us this is better than athletics. So yeah, that is our skills. Let's move on. Now, as much as I'd love to get to the Arcane Trickster stuff early, because again this was originally intended to be an Arcane Trickster build, I do think that we're going to get more use out of our multi-class first. So we are going to be jumping over to Bard. Bard, yes, I know I use it a lot, but I've never actually combined Arcane Trickster and Bard, at least not in a more meaningful capacity, so I was quite surprised that I hadn't done that combo yet, and I thought, hey, it's going to work well here. So, Bard is going to give us a few things, like Vicious Mockery, as well as one other cantrip of our choice. I'm going to go with Friends for now. We're also going to be able to pick up some spells, which is going to allow us to do various cool things with our kind of deceiving, mind-manipulating mentality, including one of the most important spells for this build, Charm Person. Now, I usually think that Charm Person isn't really worth taking on many builds. I think most of the time people would want to use it for dialogue, since you get advantage on charisma checks in dialogue when you use this, but then you just take the Friends cantrip, and that's not really an issue. You're not wasting a spell slot on it. I really underestimated the power of this spell in combat. Yes, when enemies get higher wisdom saves, it can be a bit of an issue, but with specific benefits that we're going to be getting from this build, Charm Person is going to be a lot easier to consistently land against enemies that don't outright ignore it. And being able to cast it on multiple enemies with upcasting is actually going to work really well for this build, and plus again it fits into the whole deception kind of thing, the deceiver archetype, the charlatan, the one who walks into a party full of rich nobles, walks out with pretty much all of their wealth and belongings that they had on them, and everyone thought it was totally normal. That's kind of the character we're going for here, just a tricksy little guy. So Charm Person is going to be one of the cornerstones of this build, thematically at least, so I want to grab it here. We're also going to be picking up Dissonant Whispers to do a similar thing, but with adding a little bit of psychic damage and adding Frightened instead of Charm Person. It's just more mind manipulation. Instead of charming, they're going to fear us. And I mean, just imagine being scared of this little dude. He kind of looks a bit goofy. I was going for something a bit more sly and, you know, like tactical, like, well, not tactical, but, you know, like sly and crude and, you know, very, very charming. But he kind of just looks like a goofball. He looks like a typical, oh, what do you call it? Like a cartoon villain with that flipping facial hair. Anyways, moving on. We're also going to be taking Command, thanks to the 1D&D Spell List Revisions mod, available on all platforms. That's going to allow us to basically command people to do whatever we want, such as freeze, drop to the ground, or drop their weapon. Very, very cool stuff there. And finally, for your last spell, you can kind of take whatever you like. We've got most of the things I'd say we'd want from this build, although I quite like the Sleep spell here. I think it's just another interesting way to like kind of go for that mental manipulation, because imagine this guy brushes past you in a party, mumbles a few strange words in your ear, and suddenly you just feel really drowsy and then just fall asleep, and everyone's focused on that while he kind of slips away. You know, fun stuff like that, right? For your starting instrument, pick whatever you like. I kind of went for the flute, but I think maybe the voice, just unequipping the instrument, might make a bit more sense. Entirely up to you. And finally, we do get an extra skill proficiency. I mean, we might as well take performance. I don't really want to take intimidation on this build. I don't think this guy is that intimidating. He's more sly, as I've been saying. So I think performance here, just to be able to put on a musical performance, is always quite nice. So we'll go with that. At level 2 of Bard, we're getting all the usual goodies. Song of Rest for a third short rest, as well as Jack of all trades, add up half of our proficiency bonus to anything we're not already proficient in, so making us a Jack of all trades. We're also going to get another spell, and I would say go for Tasha's or Colour Spray or something else that kind of fits the bill of what we've been going for. Maybe even Animal Friendship, if you actually want to have basically Charm Person but for animals. You know what? Probably going to take that, actually. That feels like it fits on this build. And at Bard level 3, as you can already see, we've got a brand new subclass, the College of Eloquence. Now, obviously I'm going to just address the elephant in the room here. The College of Eloquence mod is a little bit bugged right now. Unfortunately, the current version that is available to all platforms on the mod manager has this bug where while it is installed, when you go to multiclass into Bard, you cannot choose any subclass but it. So if you're just looking to use this mod anyway, or specifically this build, and you're not using any other bards in your party, this is not an issue. But if you want to have multiple bards, but don't start with Bard as their original class and don't take a subclass before multiclassing, it can be a little bit tricky. But for this build, it's not really going to matter. And look, it even has the hat as the icon. We've got a hat. It's made for this. So, College of Eloquence. You wield a blend of logic and theatrical wordplay, winning over skeptics and detractors with logical arguments, and plucking at heartstrings to appeal to the emotions of an entire audience. So yeah, basically this whole thing is about talking and being good with your words and just being able to defeat your enemies with facts and logic and, you know, all that sort of thing. But, you know, ignore that joke. But overall, it's going to do exactly what we want it to with this build, because these two abilities that we're going to get right away are going to be amazing for what we're trying to go for here. First off, Silver Tongue. You are a master at saying the right thing at the right time. When you make Deception or Persuasion ability checks, the lowest result you can roll on the die is a 10. That means the lowest possible roll we can ever get on either our Deception or Persuasion checks is a 17. At this point, it's only going to get higher. Reliable talent is a rogue feature that you get basically towards the end of the game, which makes this work for all ability checks you're proficient in, but this is kind of a diet version that we get way earlier on that is going to work for our two most important abilities skill proficiencies, meaning that we are now one of the best social encounter characters in the game at total level 4, which is nuts. But it doesn't end there. We're also going to get Unsettling Words, allowing us to unsettle a creature with our Bardic Inspiration. It uses our Bardic Inspiration die to act as a debuff to the next saving throw that creature makes. Every spell we've taken up till now pretty much has a saving throw involved, so being able to use our Bardic Inspiration to put a massive debuff on that saving throw is pretty damn huge for us, meaning that things like Charm Person and all that are going to be a lot easier to get off successfully. It works a little bit weird with how the chance to hit is calculated, because when it, because obviously this is a mod, when the game looks at something and it's like, oh yeah, you've got like a 50% chance to get to successfully charm this person, it doesn't take that 1d6 or eventually 1d8 by the time this build is done into account, so the actual odds of you hitting the spell successfully are a lot higher than what the game shows. So it's a little bit deceiving in like how useful it actually is. It's more useful. So basically, for at least for a single enemy until the end of the next round, every time we want to hit them with a powerful concentration spell that's going to take them out of the fight, we can give them a big penalty to that saving throw, which is great. Overall, these two features fit this build immensely well, both things making our Charm Person even more effective. At level 4, we're also going to pick up the feats before we jump back over to Rogue. Since we're not really going for extra attack or anything like that on this build, again, this is more of a support spellcaster single hit large damage type build, we don't really need to focus on getting extra attack, so we can play around with our level choice order a bit more. So, for our cantrips, you get to pick whatever you like. I quite like Mage Hand, although we will be getting a better version of that later with Arcane Trickster, so you don't really need to pick it up now, unless you want to take it now and retrain it out later. But something like Minor Illusion to act as a distraction just feels perfectly on theme here. We're also going to want to pick up a level 2 spell at this point, and it's entirely up to you what you want to grab here. There's things like Mirror Image, Enlarge Reduce, Aid could be very helpful if you want to be a bit more tanky, Hold Person is great, Blindness is great, Crown of Madness, all of these are great options. Just be aware that a few of these are going to appear on like the Arcane Trickster spell list as well, if you decide to go for a few more levels in there, because again, you can kind of play with the level ratios on this build a bit. Maybe you want to go 8 Rogue, 4 Bard, so just be aware that you're not picking things that are going to show up already on the very limited Arcane Trickster spell list, otherwise you're going to be wasting some spells there. Otherwise, feel free to pick whatever you like here, it really doesn't matter. I took Hold Person in my testing, because of course Hold Person plus Rogue Sneak Attack, very, very potent combo, but I also like Crown of Madness here, so feel free to replace a lower level spell that you're not really using as as much here if you want to go for something else. Moving on, we do get to choose our feat here, and it's entirely up to you what you want to take here. Obviously, Fey Touched and Shadow Touched are both very on theme, Shadow Touched especially in my opinion. However, I feel like we could actually go for something a bit more interesting, either telepathic or telekinetic. Telepathic will allow you to cast the Detect Thoughts spell, while also increasing one of your mental stats by 1, in our case our charisma, which I think would make a lot of sense. Knowing someone's thoughts before they think you would can actually give you a big edge in persuasion and, you know, deception tactics, and as such a lot of dialogue trees open up as well if you have Detect Thoughts available to you, so it actually is a very fun roleplay spell to have. However, I went for something with a bit more practicality in combat, that being telekinetic. This is playing on the idea that we're going to be using our mage hand legerdemain from Arcane Trickster to do some even more wacky things, telekinetically shoving people around, either towards us or away from us. Also, it makes sense that our mage hand would be able to throw things around the room and push people around as a distraction in, you know, populated situations. So I quite like having this here. We're also going to get learn Mage Hand as a cantrip from this, but again, we're going to be getting the better version from Arcane Trickster later. Now, I don't feel the need to move on to Bard level 5 just yet, but you can come back to it later if you want. You may feel like you want to get more uses out of your unsettling words right away and bump it up to a D8, so feel free to take this level now if you want, but I do actually want to jump back over to Rogue and grab some things from there, which are quite important. Namely, cunning actions from level 2, being able to hide, dash, and disengage as a bonus action. Disengaging is going to be quite important. If we're not able to get off our charm effects right away, being able to get away from our enemies and forcing them to come towards us is actually going to be very important for us, as you'll see when we get to level 3. But being able to dash and hide, hiding obviously giving us advantage for sneak attacks, and dashing as well, being able to give us a ton of movement speed to be able to get away if we don't need to disengage when we already have the charm effect up, allowing us to get out of the thick of it. This is all going to be extremely important for us, so I'm happy to pick this up now. Moving on to our subclass. I mean, no point in beating around the bush, we are going for Arcane Trickster. Yes, Swashbuckler is in there and would work amazingly for this build, but it's not available on consoles yet. I cry a little on the inside, but it's coming in an official patch, so let's just wait for patch 8 before we dive into that one. But with level 3 of Rogue, we're going to get Arcane Trickster, giving us access to the Mage Hand Legerdemain. When you cast Mage Hand, the Spectral Hand is invisible and can carry out additional tasks, like picking things up, throwing them around, etc, etc. It also has an unlimited range and duration, meaning that you can just send it out because it's invisible, allowing it to scout out entire areas for you, potentially without being seen, allowing you to get an idea of what you're up against before you go into it. Genuinely great for players who are slightly newer to the game. If you are kind of getting into like your first time playing Baldur's Gate 3 because the new patch is coming out, maybe you're a long time tabletop player, have a rogue with this in your party, probably Astarion, and you're going to have a fun time. It's really great for scouting out situations before you get into the thick of it, especially on higher difficulties. Next up, for our cantrips, thanks to the Mistress spell mod, Arcane Trickster has a lot more to work with, including one spell that is going to be absolutely imperative for this build. Well, there's two, but the main one is Booming Blade. Booming Blade at this level is going to allow us to do an additional 1d8 thunder damage on all of our attacks. This includes our sneak attacks. You can sneak attack with Booming Blade, so that's an extra 1d8 to our sneak attack, which is awesome. And if the attack lands, the target is sheathed in booming energy that will deal 2 to 16 thunder damage to them if they willingly move. So here's the interesting thing about this. Because since we're able to dash and disengage as a bonus action with Rogue, we're able to hit our enemies with Booming Blade, move away, forcing them to come to us, meaning that they're pretty much always going to be taking that extra damage. So, in these situations where we're not going to be charming people and we straight up do have to be in combat, well, we can just stab them in the back with a massive Booming Blade and force them to be taking extra damage when they move on their next turn. As well as the fact that if we're jumping into where an ally is already fighting another enemy, they'll just continue to fight that enemy instead, meaning that we're less likely to be hit ourselves, or that ally I should say, my apologies. So it's really great for like this kind of teamwork strategy, where if they're not attacking you because they're charmed, they're not going to be attacking you because you're running away and you've Booming Bladed them, meaning that they really don't want to move. So overall, Booming Blade is a great addition to this build. In addition to this, we're also going to take Mind Sliver, allowing us to deal 2d6 psychic damage and opening up a psychic spike into a creature's mind, which makes them have a negative 1d4 penalty to saving throws until the end of your next turn. Combining this with Unsettling Words means that not only our, charm and other concentration effects, but also our allies are going to be extremely effective. It's going to be up to you whether you want to use this or Vicious Mockery most of the time, but honestly, I think this one is going to be a pretty solid choice for you. Next up, our spell selection, and as I said, our spell selection is fairly limited for the most part until we get to the expanded spell list. So I would say you're going to want to pick up Tasha's Hideous Laughter and Colour Spray here. Tasha's is just a great debuffing spell, causing a creature to be knocked prone, meaning that you get to attack with advantage, but so does the rest of the party. And that's going to be great for your sneak attacks and just everyone else in general, especially that great weapon master fighter in your party. And Colour Spray is just pocket sand, but I feel like this character would use pocket sand. Things don't go their way, boom, pocket sand, you're blind, and then he runs off into the night with cunning action. I don't know, it's kind of fun, but it can blind creatures, which is always useful to have. Next up, the expanded spell list, meaning that we get to choose any level 1 spell from the wizard list. Well, we're taking shield. I'm sorry, it is just the best utility spell that we're going to get out of this build, and so I want to bring it here. At Rogue level 4, we're going to get another feat. We do also get to choose another spell, and I think Disguise Self is perfect for this build, so we might as well pick it up. Also, we get to choose another feat, as I said, and it's up to you really what you want to take here. Warcaster could be great if you want to get a handle on your concentration saves a bit more. There's quite a few things you could take here, something like Eldritch Adept, maybe for Devil's Sight if you've got some shenanigans going on there within the party, although unfortunately we don't get Darkness on this build, even though it would be great. I'm actually going to say that you could also go for dual wielder as well if you're going to dual wield weapons that aren't light, but I'm dual wielding daggers here. So I think an ability score improvement is going to be the best thing to just bump up our intelligence now that we're going to be using it more, meaning that both our charisma and our intelligence are doing pretty good. Now, I would say at this point we don't need anything else from Rogue. Going further now in Rogue would be extra sneak attack damage, and we will come back to Rogue in a bit because I actually do want Uncanny Dodge. But let's jump over to Bard for now and get some of the important things from 5th level of Bard, namely Font of Inspiration to regain our inspiration on a short rest as well, and bumping that up to a D8, making our Unsettling Words more powerful. We're also going to gain access to level 3 spells at this point, and in my testing I went with Hypnotic Pattern, which definitely had some usage, but maybe not the best option at some points in time. So things like Glyph of Warding, Fear, Enthrall, and Crown of Madness can all also really work well. So it's a pick your favourite type thing. If you've got the 1D&D spell list revisions mod, which I recommend everyone pick up, you're also going to get the option to grab Slow here, which is one of the best, and I mean best, team-wide debuffing spells in the game. Targeting up to 6 creatures and affecting their AC and movement speed is just so good, so I highly recommend it, but I'll go with Hypnotic Pattern for now because I feel like it fits the theme of the build slightly more. At level 6 of Bard, we are going to get our Bard subclass feature here, that being Speak with Animals. Yeah, unfortunately, College of Eloquence's level 6 feature in Tabletop doesn't translate as well over to BG3. The idea is that in Tabletop you're able to speak and converse with pretty much anyone, regardless of the languages known, but of course in this game the only other creatures that there's a language barrier with, at least from a mechanical sense, are animals. So you get Speak with Animals here. In my opinion, I'm not 100% sure it's worth it to go to level 6. Unless you're desperate for level 4 spells, maybe something like Greater Invisibility, I can see going higher in Bard at this point. But I think I want to go back to Rogue and pick up some Rogue stuff, because again, this is meant to be more of a Rogue build, so I want to take more Rogue levels. Getting Uncanny Dodge, allowing us to use our lightning quick reflexes to protect ourselves. When an attack hits you, you only take half the usual damage. This has a bit of a limit to it, but otherwise it's a pretty good ability. At level 6 of Rogue, you're going to get even more expertise. Obviously, I want to pick up expertise and sleight of hand as stealth to make us the ultimate pickpocket / stealthy boy. Also remember, at any point you can replace spells on your spell list from Arcane Trickster with spells from the Wizard spell list, which is actually the expanded spell list as well. Bit of an exploit there, so feel free to pick up other stuff that you wouldn't otherwise be able to normally if you want. At Rogue level 7 to end off the build, we're going to get Evasion, allowing your agility to let you dodge out of the way of certain spells. When a spell or effect would deal half damage on a successful dex save, it deals no damage if you succeed and half damage if you fail. This is going to give us a bit more overall tankiness between this and Uncanny Dodge when we're going up against big AoE effects and such like that. It's just going to give us a bit more survivability, and again, you probably would, most people I think would prefer going for the higher level bard spells, but I really did just kind of want to pick up some stuff from Rogue, so here we are. We're also going to be able to pick up level 2 spells from Arcane Trickster here, and you do have some interesting options. There's Silvery Barbs, one of the most broken spells in all the tabletop, which I would highly recommend for this build, but I'm not going to take it on principle. There's Shadow Blade, if you want another option for an interesting weapon, but a lot of our spells are concentration, so it's a bit limiting. You can get Crown of Madness here. You can get Tasha's Mind Whip here, which can prevent targets from taking bonus actions or reactions, which is very, very nice. You've got a lot of cool options here. Mirror Image makes a return, Invisibility, Jim's Glowing Coin, which allows you to throw a coin to distract enemies, giving them disadvantage on wisdom ability checks, and they also suffer a -3 penalty to initiative rolls. I actually quite like this idea, just thematically and roleplay wise, so we're going to pick it up. And that is an alleyway. Where is my character? There he is, and that is the build. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this is a really fun and interesting character, all about social manipulation and deceiving enemies both in and out of combat, being able to have a ton of really interesting and useful debuffing spells and ways to apply them effectively, being able to reduce the ability to make saving throws against them, making it so they're more likely to happen, and then also being able to have a ton of battlefield control by having full maneuverability around the battlefield as well, being able to support their allies by debilitating enemies, and just deal a ton of damage with big sneak attacks. We were able to get an extra 4d6 piercing damage with sneak attack, plus the extra bit of damage that's going to come from Booming Blade here, 2d8 thunder damage plus another 3d8 if they try to move after the fact, which they most likely will. You're just going to have an absolute powerhouse of a kind of single hit damage dealer on your hands, as well as all of the amazing battlefield control and support options that come packaged in. Overall, this makes Arcane Trickster look very, very good. In fact, actually, I would say a full build of Arcane Trickster just with the Mistress spell mod alone is worth investigating. But of course, we come out of this with level 4 spell slots, which is great. So overall, I'm quite happy with how this one turned out. But let's look into the equipment to see how the rest of the build comes together. So first off, for our weapon choice, we have the Rhapsody in our main hand. This is kind of the end game dagger that I think is the most important to go for, because every time you basically gain a +1 bonus to attack rolls, damage, and spell save DC, that's quite important, for every foe you slay up to a maximum of 3. So for killing foes, which you're going to do quite quickly with sneak attack, you're going to gain a bonus to both your damage, attack rolls, and your spell save DC, so you just get a little bit of everything here. Spell save DC obviously being really important for both our Bard and our Arcane Trickster spells, so it just feels right at home on this build. Also, you could possibly inflict bleeding when hitting a creature with this weapon while hiding or invisible. Did I mention this build as a Dark Urge? I think I somehow forgot to mention that along the way, but it'll be in the title, so you know. This is a Dark Urge build, meaning that we have the option to get invisibility very, very easily. So, in my opinion, this is the best endgame dagger to go for. But, in your offhand, another great endgame dagger is Orin's dagger. It says Blade of the First Blood, but that's an early access name. The wiki page will be in the description. But, when you've hit the very, very endgame, this is a great thing to go for. It comes with an additional 1d4 necrotic damage built in, and the number you need to roll a critical hit while attacking is reduced by 1, which can stack with other features. It's also going to give you the True Strike cantrip, which may seem underwhelming, but if we go down a little bit further, while this is in the offhand, you gain True Strike Riposte. Whenever a creature misses you with a melee attack, you may retaliate and gain True Strike. So you get an automatic attack and get to inflict True Strike on them, meaning that you have advantage, meaning you can sneak attack. The True Strike does not cost your concentration in this case, so it's a very, very good version of it. It's also a bound weapon, meaning that it can't be dropped and returns to you when thrown, as well as it gives you a +1 to your armor class. If you hold it in your main hand, enemies will receive vulnerability to piercing damage when struck, meaning that they'll take double damage from subsequent attacks. So you have a bit of a thing if you want to have this in your main hand or your offhand. I like having it in the offhand more for this build though. But in the early game, I quite like the idea of going and getting the Susa dagger. It's a +1 dagger in the early game, which is quite nice to get. You can get it in Act 1, but it also has the ability to silence targets upon a hit. And I like the idea that we are so good with using our voice that we can silence others. Think about it. Imagine this guy is in like a massive gathering in like the enemy camp or something, maybe even Moonrise Towers, and he has to assassinate someone who's high up on the ladder. He deceives his way in, talking his way through the guards and mingling with people until the big person they're after shows up, walks up to them, and everyone's kind of, distracted and mingling around, and then all of a sudden, bam, stabs them right in a critical artery, and they can't even make a sound to alert people to the fact that they're hurt. In fact, they're so beguiled by his charming magics that they don't even realize it, so they just die well after he's left. It's stuff like that, right? Like, they can't even hear their own screams when you stab them. I really have to go see a therapist. Because I get dark sometimes. But yes, the Susa dagger is a great early game weapon. I would even say it's worth maybe having in your offhand for a while as well, even after getting one of these daggers, but you can swap it out later on. Anyways, moving on to the headgear, we've got the Gibbous of the Worshipful Servant. At start of combat, you gain momentum equal to your charisma modifier. Momentum gives you a bit more movement speed, and since we have a pretty decent charisma modifier, we're going to get a lot of extra movement speed, which as a rogue who has short stubby legs, that's great. We're also going to gain advantage on concentration saving throws. This helps patch up our middling constitution a little bit, giving us a higher chance to pass those concentrating saving throws if we need to. Overall, I found it works pretty well. Also, it's a hat. I wanted this build to have a hat. The camera's just completely bogged off. Well, there we go. We're fine now. We'll just get it fixed now. Anyways, moving on, we have an early game option for the hat. We have the Hat of Storm Science Power. So a lot of this build revolves around you cycling in usages of Booming Blade with sneak attack. Being able to deal thunder damage means that we can gain Arcane Acuity while wearing this hat. Arcane Acuity will give us a +1 bonus for spell attack rolls and spell difficulty class for each remaining turn. So basically what this means is, just for attacking with Booming Blade, which we're already going to be doing, we're going to make all of our spells more effective. Some people, I think, would even prefer this over the Gibbous, and I can totally understand why, but the Gibbous is a cool hat, and I wanted a cool hat. But otherwise, the Hat of Storm Science Power will work just fine for this build. Next up, because we're a Dark Urge, we're going to be grabbing the Deathstalker Mantle. After we kill an enemy, we become invisible for 2 turns. This is just a great addition to the gameplay loop that we're going to be going for here, making it so enemies have an even lesser chance to hit us, and we get another guaranteed sneak attack next time we're able to attack as long as we're not detected. Fits too perfectly for this build, really wanted it here. Speaking of Dark Urge things, the Balllist Armour, giving us Aura of Murder, making enemies within 2 meters of us vulnerable to piercing damage unless they are already resistant or immune to it. We also gain a +2 bonus to initiative rolls. Overall, this is just one of the best things for boosting our damage in a major way in most cases. Yes, the base armor class is a bit low, but our high dexterity with the Gloves of Dex, that being 18, gives us a solid armor class of 19 when all is said and done. But some other options for you. The early game option would be the Spider Silk Armor. This piece of armor gives you advantage on con saves as well, so this means it'll be a good kind of piece of kit until you get the Gibbous later on, in which case you'll probably also be getting the Balllist Armor around the same time. Of course, though, you can also use the Elegant Studded Leather, giving you an extra usage of shield per short rest, advantage on stealth checks if you decide not to play a deep gnome, which I think most people will, unfortunately, as well as giving you a +2 bonus to initiative rolls, same as the Balllist Armor. That +2 to initiative always feels nice on a high dex build, guaranteeing that you're going to go first. Of course, we have the Gloves of Dex, setting our dexterity score to 18. I mean, you might not need these, depending on if you just decide to take more utility-focused spells from Arcane Trickster. You might not need a higher intelligence, but I wanted to actually use Arcane Trickster to its full potential as best I could, so I decided to go with the Gloves of Dex here. Yes, it's a bit boring. Feel free to swap this out if you want to shove the stats around. Otherwise, it's here to stay. Next up, the Line Breaker Boots. Because we have the ability to dash as a bonus action, we can use this to bump up our attack damage. Once per turn, when you dash, you gain Wrath for 2 turns. Wrath increases your bonus to your bonus damage with melee weapons by 1 for each turn remaining. So just for dashing as a bonus action, your melee attacks gain a +2 to damage. This can stack up to 7, and obviously giving you a +7 if you manage to stack it up completely. Now, of course, this is the description of the weapon now. This is how it's intended to work, and if I had to guess, it's probably how it's going to work in patch 8, because they're probably going to patch this, but it's been in the game since the start, so I don't know. But at the moment, these boots are bugged. There's no once per turn restriction, and you actually gain 3 turns of Wrath instead of 2, making them way more powerful than they actually should be. So use it while it lasts, but it's probably going to get patched soon. Either way though, these are still a good option. Regardless of that though, Disintegrating Artwalkers, always a good choice. I would probably go with them if these get patched and they don't feel as strong to you. Moving on to the accessories, we have the Amulet of Misty Step, because I'm an addict. I can't live without Misty Step on my builds in some shape or form. It's just too good. It's a bonus action get out of jail free card for sticky situations where maybe you don't want to dash and maybe you need to dash and disengage in the same turn. Misty Step is basically doing both once per short rest, but this is a free slot. Pop whatever you like in there. Maybe the Amulet's a greater help in the late game if you want to just your stats around, but otherwise this is a very solid option all around. And one of the cornerstones of this build for the late game is the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel. Now you have a lot more control over how this build functions. After using an attack with our main action, you can cast an illusion or enchantment spell as a bonus action. Spoiler alert! These are pretty much all, with the exception of Booming Blade, enchantment or illusion spells. So yeah. You're going to be able to use this pretty much constantly and have much better control over how you pilot this build. Want to go for a ranged attack as a bonus action? Vicious Mockery or Mind Spike. If you want to go for a powerful control spell, Hold Person. There's so many different things you can do with this. I would definitely play with this as much as you can. And finally, the Ring of Arcane Synergy. I mean, we're going to be using Booming Blade with every attack we do, we might as well use that to boost our damage even further. Whenever we use a cantrip, in our case Booming Blade, we're going to be able to use Arcane Synergy to deal additional damage equal to the affected entity's spell casting modifier. This is going to use either our Charisma and Intelligence based on how we leveled up, but since it's the same, it doesn't really matter. So, this is going to be an extra dollop of damage on all of our attacks that we make. Stack this up with the Linebreaker Boots, and that's a lot of damage. Stack this with Sneak Attack, stack it with Booming Blade, that's a lot of damage. Like, this build does a lot of damage, even though it's not got extra attack, it hits hard. So yeah, overall, that is the build. On a final note, we do have some dyes for this build. We have 2 modded dyes over here, but I actually didn't end up using them. I used 2 vanilla dyes, that being Harlequin Black and White and Brown Alabaster. Harlequin Black and White for the main armor here, Brown Alabaster I believe was for the boots, and yeah, the rest I kind of just left as normal. So yeah, there you go, that is the build, and overall, I'm quite happy with this one. It doesn't perform as well in my solo testing as maybe some of my full frontal marshals or more adept spellcasters, but as a support build that's meant to work with its allies to deal massive amounts of damage, and as being the face of the party in social situations, it excels. It can do massive amounts of damage, it can absolutely control most social situations in the game, and it's just a fun, interesting and kind of off-the-wall playstyle, being able to weave Booming Blade in with our sneak attacks to just deal massive amounts of damage, move away, and then deal even more damage. It just feels like a fun kind of, and it's all kind of like sound-based as well. Again, we're using our voice, we're able to silence enemies if we use the Susa Dagger. Booming Blade envelops our blade, which is like a thunder attack. I don't know, it's like a weird kind of mental manipulation sound build. And again, there's a lot of room to kind of grow and develop this build. If you don't want a higher level sneak attack, you don't care about going beyond maybe even level 4 of Rogue, slap the rest of those levels into Bard, get an extra feat, and more spellcasting. The world's your oyster, play with this one as much as you like. I just wanted to actually make use of Arcane Trickster here, and I feel like I did a pretty good job so far. So, overall, really happy with this one. Got to use a new subclass, got to use an underutilized subclass, and I just had a ton of fun with it. So yeah, one of my more interesting recent builds, at least in my opinion, but we'll see what YouTube thinks. Anyways, that is going to do it for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.